What's up, everyone? Welcome to Bilbrons and Dragons. I'm your host, Bilbron Bafflestone. So today we're having another episode of my Deep Dive series. Today looking at Telekinesis versus Bigby's Hand. So why are we looking at these two 5th level control spells? Well, it's because as a control caster, we've been very effective through Tier 1 and Tier 2, casting spells like Web and Hypnotic Pattern and Fear and Banishment, and they have been very effective. But as we get into late Tier 2 and Tier 3, we start to run into enemies that we are having a more difficult time with, because most control spells are save or sucks. And as we get in higher levels, we start running into enemies that have strong saves and magic resistance, and most importantly, legendary resistance. Legendary resistances can shut down a control caster pretty quickly. Very hard to eat through those in order to have an impact on the battle. So fortunately, once we get access to 5th level spells, we get access to options to use against such creatures. Now, one of them is Wall of Force, and Wall of Force is probably the most powerful 5th level spell out there. It's an amazing control spell. No save, so it bypasses legendary resistances and magic resistance and such, but it can sometimes be difficult to deploy. Wall of Force is better when you are trying to seal off one creature while dealing with its colleagues, but sometimes you're just fighting one creature, and it's really strong, and it's got legendary and magic resistances. And so Wall of Force isn't as great because it prevents you from doing damage to that target, and basically just puts a pause button on the combat without really advancing it. Right? There are things that you can do to a creature inside Wall of Force with spells if you set it up right, but even that is pretty costly in terms of resources, and your marshals are pretty much out of it. They can't really do anything to a creature inside a Wall of Force. So that gives us the options of Telekinesis and Bigby's Hand. Both of these are spells that bypass those difficulties with Wall of Force. It does leave that enemy out there where it can be attacked by your allies, including your martial allies, and it lacks some of the openings that Wall of Force has, right? Like you can teleport out of a Wall of Force, you can disintegrate a Wall of Force, and once Wall of Force is out, you can't redirect it from target to target. So enter Telekinesis and Bigby's Hand. These are very valuable spells that allow you to affect an enemy through an ability check, which bypasses magic resistance, right? So the spells are only available to certain classes. Some classes only get access to one, in which case it's a pretty easy choice. But wizards, sorcerers, and bards through magical secrets do have access to both. However, both Telekinesis and Bigby's Hand are redundant enough and overlap enough that you're probably not going to want both. And so which one do you take? It's kind of an important question for that 9th, 10th level caster. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to do a really deep dive into these spells and break down which one is best for you. And I'll explain at the end which one I think is best for me. So without further ado, let's jump into this and break down Telekinesis versus Bigby's Hand. So I'll put the spell descriptions on the screen so that you can read them, but I'm going to summarize what they can do for sake of simplicity. Bigby's Hand creates 4 effects. The Clenched Fist, which does damage to creatures or objects to the tune of 4d8 force, about 11 damage once you take hit rates into account. It can do the Grasping Hand, which grapples creatures that are huge or smaller, with advantage versus medium or smaller creatures, and can move them around on subsequent rounds, not on the casting round. Bigby's will create a Forceful Hand that can push an enemy up to 30 feet or so, with advantage versus medium or smaller creatures, and it can create the Interposing Hand, which prevents an enemy from getting closer to you and provides half cover from it. Now, note that some DMs may allow it to interact with objects beyond clenched fists, providing some utility. And note that some DMs may allow you to use Grasping Hand and then use its other effects on subsequent rounds. In both of these cases, Bigby's hand gets a boost, obviously. Whereas Telekinesis creates two effects. If you target a creature, it will inflict restrainment on them, and you can move the target up to 30 feet in any direction. And if you target objects, you can move stuff up to 1,000 pounds, and you can target stuff that is worn or carried by enemies. That's very interesting because it says specifically that you can do so in the spell description, and personally, if it doesn't specifically say so, I don't think that you can. Targeting objects that are worn or carried by other creatures is very difficult in 5th edition. Now, the first important difference that I want to talk about is the action economy involved with both of these spells. Both are action cast, they are both concentration, but in rounds after round 1, Bigby's hand uses your bonus action, whereas Telekinesis uses your action. And which of these is ultimately better depends on the build and competing abilities, right? The opportunity cost. Now, at first glance, using the bonus action does seem superior. But keep in mind that often a caster's action, once the concentration spell is cast, is a cantrip. Cantrip plus bonus action damage is not that great. Typically, a summon would be better. Whereas the bonus action can actually be very strong, and you can get them from all sorts of sources. Spells like Misty Step, or Healing Word, or Tiny Servant. Class abilities like Bardic Inspiration, Blade Song, or Quicken Spell. Racial abilities like those of the Shadow Kai, the Goblin, or the Earth Genasi, or feats like Telekinetic or Poisoner, or even items like the Staff of the Python, Bag of Tricks, or Boots of Speed. And do note the wording on Bigby's hand is that you can use the bonus action on subsequent rounds, not the initial one. You can't use it twice in the initial round. I've seen that interpretation sometimes, and it is incorrect, rules as written. But this is going to be a very important consideration in choosing between the two. Some builds are going to be better off with one versus the other, and vice versa. So now let's go over Bigby's hand's advantages over Telekinesis. For one, it uses the bonus action, which opens up options that use the caster's action. So it could be a cantrip, like an attack cantrip or blade ward or something. But it could also be the dodge action, which is very strong. Or you could cast a defensive spell like Mirror Image or Blink, which is often hard to find the actions for, but if you've got Bigby's hand down, then it might make sense to protect your concentration with a Mirror Image or a Blink. Or you can use a non-concentration attack spell like Psychic Lance or Fireball. Bigby's hand also has a longer range than Telekinesis, 120 feet versus 60 feet, which I consider a fairly minor advantage in the big picture, but it can be situationally significant, and let's face it, in a vacuum you would always take more range, right? The hand does not require sight to use, versus Telekinesis, which does require sight, and this is a significant benefit in many situations. It allows the PC to leverage heavy obscurement, for example, pyrotechnics, and see my recent videos on pyrotechnics and heavy obscurement for more info on all that. But definitely a point in favor of Bigby's hand here. I do prefer spells that don't require sight to target. And you can upcast Bigby's hand. You can get a little bit more damage out of Clenched Fist or Grasping Hand versus Telekinesis, which you cannot upcast. Now, Bigby's hand does offer more versatility. It offers the 4 combat effects versus just the 2 of Telekinesis. So you can use the Clenched Fist option to get an attack roll for 48 damage, whereas Telekinesis does not have a direct attack option for damage. And again, attack rolls are excellent when heavy obscurement is in play. You can get those off versus sight spells, which just don't work. And bonus action damage is at least something, but 11 average DPR is unimpressive, and if you combine that with a cantrip, you're not really contributing all that much, in my opinion, doing less damage than a martial, but using spell slots to make it happen. I don't consider that to be a very good trade-off. Now, Interposing Hand offers a situationally strong defensive option, whereas Telekinesis has no similar option. And I am impressed by Interposing Hand. This is, to me, arguably the best iteration of Bigby's hand that is very effective versus some enemies. This iteration only requires 1 bonus action to use it. You fire and forget, And it's really good versus melee-only enemies with a 10-foot reach or less. They can't get by it unless they have 27 strength, which is a pretty high bar. Only 2.7% of creatures have a 27 strength, with a median CR of 23, so not really the sort of thing that you see every day. And even if they do have 27 strength, it's still pretty good as difficult terrain. They're going to need a lot of move to get through it. So interposing hand can be pretty good. It will keep enemies from getting any closer to the caster, and that can be very strong. So interposing hand is good. Bigby's can also do forceful hand, which is a push, but in my opinion, it's rare that it's better than grasping. I mean, grasping can move them the same distance the following round, but they're also grappled. But that said, this isn't useless. Pushing things into immediate hazards like off cliffs or into lava does have value in some cases, so forceful hand can be cool. And then there's grasping hand, which can grapple similarly to telekinesis, but it doesn't impose the restrainment of telekinesis, it's just the grapple. However, it does have a better ability check stat, offering a strength of 26 versus telekinesis having a max of 20, maybe a 22 in rare cases. And it also gives advantage to the check if the target is medium size or smaller, whereas you don't get any sort of benefit like that with telekinesis. Also, the grapple does not need to be actively maintained. They are going to stay grappled until they escape that grapple, whereas with telekinesis you need to make the check every round. But keep in mind that because it's a grapple, it can be resisted with both athletics or acrobatics, whereas telekinesis, it's strength only. Now, once they are grasped, you can move them up to 60 feet, whereas you can only move them 30 feet with telekinesis. Now, note that the grapple happens after moving it, so it's going to take 2 turns to move a creature, grapple on the first turn, and then move them on the second turn. But 60 feet of force move is really good. And note that the hand is not a creature, so it's not at half move when it's grappling. And you can inflict more falling damage if you use it to drop creatures. Finally, once they are grappled, you can actually do damage to them, whereas with telekinesis, you cannot do damage to them once you've got them in your telekinetic grip. And the damage is, again, around 11 DPR. It's about equivalent to the clenched fist once you account for hit percentages. And again, you can lift the enemy high so that more damage is inflicted through falling damage if they escape. So those are the main advantages for Bigby's hand over telekinesis. It uses the bonus action after the casting round, it has twice the range, it doesn't require sight, you can upcast it, and it offers more versatility, including the cool interposing hand. Now let's look at telekinesis and its advantages over Bigby's hand. So first of all, telekinesis does use your action, which opens up options that use the caster's bonus action. For example, Healing Word, Misty Step, Blessing of the Raven Queen, Telekinetic, Bardic Inspiration. There's a whole bunch, right? I gave you a long list earlier. So that can be a good thing if you have a strong bonus action. But most importantly, telekinesis inflicts restrainment. Bigby's hand only creates damage, grapple, a push, or a meat shield, whereas I consider restrainment to be the most powerful of all of these options. In the big picture, restrainment will inflict more damage than Bigby's hand by setting up your allies with attacks at advantage, right? Unlike Wall of Force, which takes your marshals off the table in terms of damaging the targeted creature, this sets your allies up for that. Restrainment also provides defenses against any ranged attacks that the enemy might want to take. The grapple of Bigby's hand doesn't provide this defense of restrainment where attacks are at disadvantage, so that's definitely a plus for telekinesis. And note that when I say no defense here, I'm talking about grasping hand. Interposing hand does provide half cover, so a little bit of defense. But still, this is a big point in favor of telekinesis to me. Inflicting restrainment is really good, way better than the other options of Bigby's hand. Telekinesis also has a 10-minute duration versus the 1-minute duration of Bigby's hand, so it can conceivably last for multiple battles. Although, note that it uses the action anyway, so there is no real advantage to precasting. You might be able to avoid potential counterspells, but that's going to be pretty rare. And so yeah, that is kind of disappointing for a spell to have a 10-minute duration, but to have no advantage from precasting. But regardless, I would still prefer to have the 10-minute duration. And again, with telekinesis, the target has to use its strength ability check versus the grasping hand of Bigby's, which can be either athletics or acrobatics to resist. And note that the target isn't grappled, so the grapple can't be broken by forced movement, unlike Bigby's hand, which is just a grapple and which can be broken by forced movement. Now, one of the big advantages of telekinesis is that it directly affects enemies without an object to act as a medium. So that means the caster's bonuses to ability checks apply, whereas when it's the hand making the check, you can't use them. So things like Jack of all trades, magical guidance, lucky, peerless skill, all of these things can be used to buff your ability check, and that can make telekinesis really good, whereas you can't really do that with Bigby's hand. So this is a huge advantage to telekinesis over Bigby's hand, in my opinion. Being able to get your ability check buffs in there is just so huge. Also, the effect can't be ended by destroying the object used as a medium. You can destroy a Bigby's hand, but you can't destroy telekinesis. Now, that said, Bigby's hand is pretty durable. As an object, it's rules as written, unaffected by many spells and abilities. But I have noticed that that's kind of a finicky and strict reading of the rules. I think a lot of DMs are going to overrule this and allow abilities and spells to affect the hand. And it does have AC 20 and the caster's max HP, so that's pretty solid relative to a summon. And it's nice to combo with Aid for better durability since it's based on the caster's max HP. But still, I find this is a solid advantage for telekinesis. Not having a hand out there that can be destroyed makes the spell a lot more reliable. You can also switch targets more easily. You can just focus on a different target once the first target is down, or if it's more tactically advantageous for any reason. Whereas with Bigby's, it's not so easy. You have to move the hand around. And the effect follows the target even if they are teleported. Right? You can teleport away from Bigby's hand, but you can't teleport away from telekinesis. Unless you teleport outside of the 60-foot range, of course. Now, dispel magic on the target doesn't end the spell where it does end Bigby's hand. Now, this is as I interpret it, ask your DM, but to me, if you target a Bigby's hand, it's going to get dispelled. But if you target a creature that is being affected by telekinesis, I think it just breaks that iteration of telekinesis and doesn't actually break the spell unless it's cast on you. Finally, because telekinesis is not an object, the target cannot avoid being targeted by positioning themselves in a spot where the Bigby's hand couldn't access. It's a large hand, it can't fit into some spaces, so you can find cover from it. Maybe you make that cover with Wall of Stone with crenellations or an instant fortress or something, but you can also find natural cover that's just too small for the Bigby's hand to squeeze through, whereas with telekinesis, that's not a thing. Finally, telekinesis can affect objects, whereas Bigby's hand can only affect creatures except with clenched fist. Now, I know that a lot of DMs are going to allow Bigby's hand to affect objects. It makes intuitive sense, and it goes with the rule of cool. I guess it was used that way in Critical Role. So yeah, if the DM allows it, then yeah, it can affect objects, and in that case, Bigby's hand is better. But rules as written, a lot of these effects only target creatures. Also note that the 1,000-pound weight limit that's listed in telekinesis only applies to objects, not creatures. Right? According to the rules, creatures only need to be huge or smaller. There's no weight limit specified in regards to creatures, just for objects. Note also that rules as written with telekinesis, you can target items held or worn by the enemy. This is a fantastic combat option versus certain enemies, right? If they've got a powerful sword or a powerful staff or some such in their hands, you can take it out of their hands with telekinesis, and I think that's low-key pretty awesome. There's no visible effect, so it can be used covertly with sleight of hand and such. And telekinesis can be useful in the exploration phase and in certain utility scenarios. You can exert fine control, so it works with skills and tools, and that makes it a really strong means of remote manipulation, stronger than, say, Mage Hand or Unseen Servant. You can manipulate things from a distance, from safety, covertly. That can be pretty useful. So which one of these is better? Well, my preference is for telekinesis. Telekinesis wins over Bigby's hand for me, but it's close. It's close enough to be build dependent. And here's my thinking on this. To me, the purpose of taking Bigby's hand or telekinesis is specifically to target a BBEG with legendary resistance. That's the only thing that I'm taking these for. While Bigby's hand is more versatile, the alternate uses of it are, in my opinion, inferior to other options that you can do to accomplish those things. I think Atasha's style summon is better than Clenched or Forceful or Interposing Hand. It's a creature that has its own action economy. You don't even need to use your bonus action. They come with other abilities. They tend to present more threat. They tend to be better meat shields. They can grapple. So if I want to do things like that, I mean, even animate objects can be better for damage or grappling. So honestly, it's hard to see myself casting Bigby's Hand when I want damage or grappling or meat shielding. For those particular applications, I'm going to want to cast something else. Now, I can see thinking otherwise if your spell's known or prepped is a limiting factor. The versatility of Bigby's Hand could free up space for other options, in which case maybe it makes sense. But personally, I try to find better options when I want to accomplish those goals. So I'm not really all that impressed with the alternate uses of Bigby's Hand, whereas the alternate uses for Telekinesis can have a strong impact. I think targeting an enemy's weapon or item can be low-key amazing. I think moving 1,000-pound objects around for 10 minutes can be low-key amazing. Right? Anytime you're trying to do construction or fortification or searching or looting, that can be really useful. And moving allies around for 10 minutes can be excellent in the exploration pillar. You can bypass walls and chasms and traps and things like that. And when we're talking about that single application of taking down a single BBEG with legendary resistances, I find that the restrained offered by Telekinesis is far superior to the grappled that you get from Bigby's Hand. Even though an ability check contest is required every round, it's worth it to have such a stronger impact, in my opinion. It's also very compelling to me that Telekinesis does not act through the medium of an object. The problem with summons when you're going up against really high-level, high-CR BBEG creatures is that they are so easily destroyed. The Bigby's Hand hit points are tied to the caster's hit points. That's usually not very high on a wizard or a sorcerer. And some of these things have just epic attack sequences that are going to tear through a Bigby's Hand in one round. So instead of taking an action to escape, it could just easily take an action to destroy the Bigby's Hand. So that's huge. And then also the ability to combo the ability check with your own abilities is huge. Telekinesis can become so reliable if you combo it with something like Peerless Skill or whatever. I also prefer using the action to control Telekinesis and not the bonus action required to control Bigby's Hand. Your mileage may vary with this, but the builds that I play tend to have access to these typically strong bonus action options, and the action that I do is usually a cantrip, so I'd rather give up that cantrip than Blessing of the Raven Queen or something. Finally, I much prefer the longer duration of Telekinesis to the extended range of Bigby's Hand. It really appeals to me that you can potentially use it in multiple battles. See my video on resource management for more info. And while in a vacuum 120-foot range is better than 60-foot range, it's not that much better. It's not like being 300 feet away. So if I have to stay within 120 feet, I may as well stay within 60 feet so I can also throw down counter spells or silvery barbs. So to me, the extended range of Bigby's Hand is not that big a deal, but the extended duration of Telekinesis is considerably better. So that's it. That's my take on Telekinesis versus Bigby's Hand. Telekinesis wins by a nose over Bigby's for me. Although both are excellent spells, and I can totally see it going the other way, especially if you are a build that has like a really good action. That would make a huge difference. But let me know what you think in the comments below. It's really close. So if you've got a really good argument for Bigby's Hand, or if you've got some really cool anecdotes for it, please let me know in the comments. Regardless, thanks so much for watching. This has been Bill Bronze and Dragons. I'm your host, Bill Bron Bafflestone. See you next time.